well. For those who aren't familiar with CASA, and I'm pretty sure all of us are, but we are court-appointed special advocates. And what we do, we are assigned to cases where there's probable child abuse or either neglect. And once child abuse or neglect or at risk, abused or neglected or at risk of abuse and neglect, then that's when we really dive into the case. We do our own independent investigations, and what we do those, we monitor the case and the children, and what we do is we put all of that information into a court report, submitted to the court with all our observations and recommendations and any concerns we may have. And doing all that, generally everybody is thinking initially when the case begins that we need to try to stabilize the family and reunify the family. That's first and foremost on everybody's mind. Can this be remedied? Can the situation that brought the children into care or the protective order, can that be remedied? If not, then we think about relative placement or kinship foster care or something like that. So since just about the vast majority of our cases, we'll have to try to at least identify viable relative options and that sort of thing, placement goals. Then we need to really seriously consider keeping the children in the family of origin. So that's Susan McCafferty. She is Lynchburg Department of Social Services Kinship Placement Coordinator, and her supervisor, April Watson, to try to help us to really go over some of the do's and don'ts of relative placement. And I think we have some families that have recently gone through relative placement to help us with how they effectively navigated any challenges they may have. And I certainly have questions about kinship placement and that sort of thing. So I am going to turn it over to Miss Susan McCafferty. Susan, we can't hear you.
All right. Can you hear me now? You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm Susan McCafferty, Lynchburg Human Services. I am the Kinship Resource Coordinator for the foster care unit. I'm also an active abuse neglect worker as well in our unit. And I just want to share with you my personal experience working as an abuse neglect worker and then coming over into helping families become resource parents for their relative children. So over the past 5 years, I have worked with a lot of children who, of course, want to go home, and older children who just struggle with maintaining in a placement. They're constantly disrupting. You're always, as a worker, you're always, talking the child through it, saying, it's going to be better the next time. So it's a matter of, always packing up their stuff and moving to the next placement. And in listening to the children that I have worked with, I've had older kids say to me, I'd rather just be in a group home where I have to work with staff. I don't want to be in a foster family. It's not my family. I want to be with my family. I've had one young lady attempt suicide because she couldn't be with birth family. And I always continually, in my mind, I'm searching for solutions and just trying to figure out a better way to do things. And it wasn't until recently, within my own personal experience in my family, where I'm at that stage of life where I have an empty nest, and then there's 3 children in my family. I'm a mother of 3, and everybody flew the coop, and they came back because my daughter was away for a whole year and had come back home. And so the other 2 children came over and started talking about their childhood experience. They were going through photo albums and just talking about where my son got his blue eyes and how, you know, all of the males in my side of the family all have the same color blue eyes. And in that moment, just listening to my own children reminisce and going through the photo albums and talking about their childhood, I just thought, how would that feel for a child who may be in foster care in my home, not being able to share in that experience and not having that experience in their own life? And it just hit me that we have to do better for these kids. We have to work harder to get them with family. If we can't return them home to the birth parents, we have to really do the best that we can to get them with somebody in their family that they have a connection with. So that's what April and I are here to just talk about what we're doing here at Lynchburg, to just give you a little bit more understanding of what we all need to do as a team to help these children, you know, just have a better life. I do have a PowerPoint. I'm not sure how we can share that. Was I supposed to email that to you, Kendall?
Or is there a way?
I don't.
I think there's a button in the top right corner. If you see your red leave button, just to the left of that, there's like a little box with an arrow pointing up.
Okay.
And I think that's shared content.
Do you want me to do that, Susan? And I'll manage it for you?
Yes, if you can, April, thank you.
All right, I'm doing that right now. Okay. Let me know when you can see it.
We got it.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
So you can go to the next screen.
Yeah.
So we just basically want to talk about the why. Why do we need to promote a kin first culture here in Lynchburg? And you know, first and foremost, it's the ethical thing to do. It's the right thing to do for our kids that we work with. To turn over every stone to try to find family for these kids to be with. You know, just think about your own family and all the things that you get from your family, your culture, your identity, your genetics. You have a story. Every one of us have a story. And these kids have a story that they deserve to know. So being connected with someone in their family just helps give them that sense of belonging and sense of identity, and that they have some kind of sense of connectedness. It also helps with placement stability. We know through research that children who are placed with family are less likely to disrupt their placement. They're stable. It reduces their trauma because they're not going to a stranger. They're with someone in their family. Siblings are more likely to stay together. Kinship placements help promote equity because we do have a higher number of African American children in care. It's continuity of just continuity for children as far as maybe being able to attend the same church. Their doctor stays the same. Their school stays the same. Children who are in kinship placements take less medication, have improved mental health, improved emotional health. Kinship placements help address our foster care family shortage. We are always scrambling to find places for children to be. When we have family that are able to come forward and become resource parents, it helps everything. And you know, the saddest thing is that the state of Virginia ranks last for kinship care, and I know that we here in Lynchburg want to be number one. So we're just really working hard to switch our numbers and get to the top of the list rather than being at the bottom. You can switch the slide, April.
Okay. Little lag. There we go. And that's a perfect segue into these numbers. It is alarming that Virginia is the last in terms of kinship care numbers. And so just, you can see right here, this is the nationwide number. So in 2009, 24% of kids in foster care were in kinship foster homes. Flash forward to 2019, 32% of kids were in kinship foster homes. So that's only an 8% increase in 10 years. So there is a lot of work to do nationwide and then also in Virginia. This right here is a kind of a little slideshow I put together. I tried to do some localities close by, but this is the percentage of children in foster care in Virginia as of May 2021. And so in Virginia as a whole down here, I don't know if you guys can see the number, but out of all the kids in foster care in Virginia, 11% are in kinship foster homes as a state. Our goal and our Virginia's goal is for 24% of kids to be in foster or in kinship placements, excuse me. So 11% of children in foster care in Virginia are in kinship placements. And so then I broke it down. And so, and that's about that's over 5,000 children in foster care. Out of over 5,000 children in foster care in Virginia, 470 in May were in kinship placements. That's just a tiny little number. In Amherst, about 11% of their 11.5% of their kids are in foster care, and obviously Amherst has a much smaller population than Lynchburg, so that's, for them, that averages out to about 3 kids in foster care and kinship placements. Appomattox, as of the numbers as of last month, was 0%. Bedford 4.9%, and they have 75, 80 kids in foster care, and so that's about 3 kids for them. Campbell, it looks like per the numbers, it was about 5% last month, which is, 2 or so out of 50 ish. These numbers change day to day sometimes. And then Lynchburg, ours has stayed at 33.8, 34, 35% for the last year or so. But that's, we have about 175 kids in foster care, and 54 of them are in a kinship placement. And then Nelson, they were at about 21.7%, and that they have about 5 or so kids in kinship care out of 27-ish. So those are the numbers locally too, just to give you a better idea. I know you all represent a lot of these localities, and I think it's important that we know how we're doing regionally, kind of in this area, and because you all as CASA have a really important role to advocate for these placements, to keep your eyes on it. You are doing kind of your own assessments and your own investigations, and I think you are a very important key in this to kind of keep the pressure on DSS and on families, because we know that it is in their best interest. I wanted to then kind of jump into just to let you know that the state of Virginia very much wants to have a kin first culture, which means kinship is our go-to every single time. We automatically default to kinship. And so they are seeking to create a kin first culture, and they've changed a lot of the foster care and approval policies specifically to accommodate kinship placements and to make them easier to do and much more quickly. So the state has essentially made it so that if a child comes into foster care and there's an appropriate kinship, assuming they can pass the basic background checks, those children can be placed immediately, the day of removal, days after, very quickly. The state, you have to do a couple basic background checks, which can be done immediately, and then you have 6 months to complete other things such as training, physicals, TB screens. Those can be delayed for up to 6 months, and that is to quickly get children in kinship placements much more quickly. Let's see. I then added in just some pieces of guidance and code and policy, just to give you just some peeps at, or just a peek at how our code and our policy and our guidance really is pushing that kin first culture and making it more feasible and really requiring us to do this. So as you can see right here, the local board, so DSS shall first seek out kinship care options to keep children out of foster care and as a placement option for those in foster care. So we are required to look at that as the first option every single time. And so, it's important too, is a judge asking, did you look at kinship placements before you remove this child? Have you looked at kinship placements at the 5-day hearing? Why is this child not with a kinship placement yet? Is there anybody viable or feasible? And so asking those questions immediately, and as a CASA, that's a perfect place for you to advocate. Next, just some of these are some of just little tidbits I pulled from our guidance just to make you aware that the LDSS shall document diligent efforts to notify in writing all grandparents and other relatives, both maternal and paternal, when the child is being removed or has been removed. And this is a key too. I think this is really important. Notification shall also be given to all parents, including adoptive and step parents, any sibling who has been removed from the custody. So that means kids who have been in care before and been adopted and parental rights terminated. We have an obligation to notify their adoptive parents, any step parents, any other non-custodial parent. If they shared, if the children share different fathers, we have an obligation to notify that sibling's other parent that this child is in foster care. And so that's another excellent place you guys can advocate and ask DSS, can I have copies of your relative letters? Can you give me a list of who all you've contacted so far? I noticed that there were some other siblings and no one's been notified, or when's your plan to do this? So things like that. So those are just great places for you to just kind of ask and add in your report and assist if you want to. The purpose of the written note. Okay, so then next I just highlighted this written notice shall occur within 30 calendar days after removing a child from the custody of parents. So DSS has 30 days to mail out all these letters. And we have a process called Accurant where we can take the identifying information of the birth parents, put them into a system, as long as we have their names, date of birth, like a social, we can put it in and it brings up sometimes hundreds of pages of people who are likely connected to this family. And sometimes it helps to sit down with the birth parent and take that list and say, do you know these people? How are you related? Every once in a while, it might be an ex-uncle 5 times removed that hasn't talked to them in years, but a lot of times it can be a relative, or it might be somebody who saw some turmoil in the family or had some difficulty or struggles and stepped away to create another life. And so you never know who's out there. And sometimes our birth families might not think of that person, or maybe it's somebody that didn't occur to them, or maybe it's somebody they don't want to know their business. We don't know, but we have an obligation to notify and to seek them out. Next up, another little piece of policy or guidance I pulled is individuals not related by birth, marriage, or adoption to the child, but who have emotionally significant relationships with the child may be willing to fulfill the functions of a family relationship for the child in foster care. So there's also our policy, our guidance and code has been updated to include fictive kin, which means people who may not be blood related to this child may be a really, auntie's best friend that has been there at every birthday party and knows this child well. It could be somebody, grandma's best friend's daughter who knows this child. It could be somebody around the corner who is a neighbor that's been very involved. It can be anybody that has a significant emotionally significant relationships with this child. And there are lots of ways to get creative with that. If they have a relationship with that child, to make it happen and to do it even more quickly. Another kind of little guidance section too is searching for both maternal and paternal family and lifelong connections is an ongoing process throughout the child's involvement with the child welfare system. That process should begin as soon as the child is at risk of being placed outside of the home, and it should continue with a sense of urgency until the child has achieved permanency. So that means every step of that way, we are supposed to be looking for kin. We don't send out letters in the beginning and not hear anything back and then close that door. We have an obligation to look for relatives the entire case, throughout the entire case, and that until permanency is achieved. So that means that if a relative comes at month 10 and steps up, we have an obligation to assess them and to look at them. Nothing is done until an adoption is finalized, and we are obligated both ethically and by policy and code to explore those relatives throughout the life of the case. And truly, we should be seeking them out and looking for them. You should also, at a minimum, the service worker shall look for relatives at the time the child enters foster care, at least once a year, and then prior to any placement changes. So if you have a child you're working with that keeps moving and bouncing around, every single time that child moves, another relative search kind of assessment it should be done, because potentially there's a relative that could stop that bouncing and stop that moving. So it is important to know that really the entire way, we are supposed to be looking at relatives. And even if they come up at month 6 and this child is with an amazing foster family, we have an ethical obligation, and we are required by code and by law to look and give that family a genuine chance at being placed together. And I wanted to pop that in there too. A person with a legitimate interest. It could be grandparents, step-parents, former step-parents, blood relatives, and family members provided any such party has intervened in the suit or is otherwise properly before court. So they also kind of add in some other things down there. But again, just to reiterate too, that is, they are, even if a parent's parental rights have been terminated, we can still look at relatives if that child has not been adopted. So relatives can still step in if that child has not been adopted. A final order of adoption has been entered. And then at the bottom, I just kind of added in adoption by relative or non-relative is preferable to a transfer of custody, as adoption affords a greater sense of belonging and permanency for the child. And I just think that's important to look at, to make sure that when we have relatives who are fostering children in care, that they know that there are options such as adoption, and it's not always just a transfer of custody. Sometimes adoption gives the child more permanency, and it gives that relative financial and other supports that will make them all more successful in the future. Switch back to Susan now.
Yeah, and I just want to talk about some challenges that I see working with kinship families. First of all, it's okay to have services offered to the kinship caregivers. Kinship caregivers are not foster parents. They do go through training, but the training is 6 weeks long. It's designed specifically for kinship resource parents. So, you know, if something is not going well, don't give up. Like, see if you can put a service in place to help that family. And then some particular challenges that families go through is that their roles have to switch. If you have grandparents who are now resource parents, they're no longer in the grandparent role. They have to become parents. So they can't be the fun grandparents anymore. They are the parent. Maintaining boundaries and abiding by court orders. If, you know, the court has ordered that the child cannot have contact with birth parents, then the relatives have to abide by that court order. They have to maintain boundaries, and that can be hard for grandparents, especially when, you know, you're basically telling them they can't have contact with their own child. And sometimes that may be a reason that is something we do talk about with kinship placements, because if they feel that they can't maintain that boundary, or their adult child may need them more, then they may not be a good placement. There's also grief and loss all around. The resource, the relative who takes the child in has their own loss experience with their losing sometimes other family relationships. You know, their whole schedule gets changed. Sometimes they have loss of income because they've had to change job hours. You know, just loss of time. We're also in kinship families, there's generational trauma, and that's where services can be very helpful, because, you know, sometimes one family member has, you know, gone a little bit further with their healing process and have been able to, you know, change some things about their family history. But there still may be things that come up that they may need some extra support or help. We see a lot with the kids, a sense of divided loyalties, because, you know, I have a situation right now where children have been with a relative for over a year, and we're looking at return home. And so the children are afraid to hurt the relative caregivers' feelings, and they don't want to hurt their families, their birth mother's feelings. So just paying close attention to that and seeing it for what it is, and just making sure that you have service providers that can help the family deal with that. Lack of resources isn't so much of an issue anymore because of all of the changes that the state has made with helping resource families you know, have access to a stipend, a monthly stipend to help care for the kids. And you know, as a CASA, you'll probably, I'm sure, come into situations where a child may be diverted and they're not in foster care. And there are some resources available through TANF for those situations. So, you know, I guess the main takeaway from this is kinship placements can look different than foster care placements, and we need to, you know, stick with it and not give up so soon, and just make sure that we're advocating for families to have services to help them be successful. You can change the slide, April.
And I was just going to add too, you should expect that a kinship placement is going to need more work and is going to be more difficult, but it's so worthwhile.
Now, I'm not going to read through this whole slide, and we certainly can share this PowerPoint with you as well, but we have created our own policy here in our agency, and we're not quite where we should be, but we are definitely making tremendous efforts to abide by the policy that we've created for ourselves. And, you know, first and foremost, Lynchburg Human Services believes kin will be appropriate unless determined otherwise through an assessment process. So we really are making every effort to look at family members, and we have coordinated with our CPS unit, where if they're working with a family and they feel like it may be a removal, we start having a conversation, they start getting contact information. And so we have had actually several situations where children have entered foster care and have gone immediately with a relative. There's not been any delay. They haven't had to step foot in a foster home. They're immediately going with a relative, and that has worked out well. And you can just see that, you know, CPS is starting the conversation, trying to build a support system around the family. When children are on the verge of coming into care, we're communicating better. The Child Protective Service worker will come down to our unit and say, I've got this family, this is the contact information, so we can get that process started. And, you know, just making better efforts to find kin. And so I mean, one thing that I do, and we're trying to really get this across to everybody in the unit, is searching through medical records, school records, Facebook searches. In medical records, sometimes you'll find that, you know, if there's an approved relative who can be contacted for HIPAA, like, you know, that's somebody that you can contact. For schools, there might be somebody approved to pick the child up, and you know, that would be a person you can contact. You know, a lot of times teachers know family members and can help us with that. And we try to have frequent conversations with birth parents just along the whole foster care timeline to see make sure we're not missing anything. And you can switch that slide, April. So some of the things that we need to do as a team is we need to get the word out for anybody who works in child welfare, CASA, judges, attorneys, our CSA office, witness advocates, court services. It's just a constant conversation with service providers, teachers, you know, what you're doing, what CASA is doing tonight by having, you know, a training session on it, hosting events where people can learn about not just kinship placements, but how to deal with family dynamics and families who are now finding themselves switching roles and dealing with generational trauma. You know, just everything possible to educate all the folks who work in child welfare to make better efforts and be more focused on family. I know here in our unit, we're really making it a point to bring it up in unit meetings, and we're doing lunch and learns the third Friday of every month, where we're trying to focus on some of these specific dynamics that we see with kinship placements. We also want attorneys to be advocating for their clients, talking to their clients about identifying kin, sharing that information with our agency. We want judges to be more aware of kin and asking questions in court. And of course, CASA, you know, you guys serve a pretty powerful and significant role. You could be asking questions with the parents. Sometimes the parents may be more likely to give you that information before they would give it to the agency. And family partnership meetings are important. Child family team meetings, they're all important venues to be searching for kin and to be pulling family members into the decision-making process for families. You can go to the next slide, April. And this, I think, we've already touched on this a little bit throughout this presentation. You know, I don't know if we'll see this, but it would be helpful if we had a designated person in our unit that could just focus on family finding. That's definitely on a wish list. We don't have that yet, but that would be a really helpful solution. And then, you know, like I said earlier, case mining, emergency school contacts, school history, talking to school staff. Once again, medical records, dental records, Facebook searches. The relative search has to be every step of the way, from CPS to family partnership meetings to every turning point of a foster care case. You know, if you're at a foster care review, do we have relatives? Why don't we have relatives? Let's do another search when we get to permanency. Just a continual conversation. And you know, as I said earlier, FPMs are really helpful. I have a case that the child has been in foster care for quite some time, many disrupted placements, and we recently had a family partnership meeting with her, bringing family members back to the table and trying to figure out a solution or find a family member that this child could move to. There's also, I just want to mention, you can go on to YouTube, and there are lots of short stories of kinship foster care placements, and just a lot of educational tools for you to explore yourself. You can go to the next slide, April. And then once we have children with kin, we have to really work hard to support the kin family, and that, you know, was the specialized training that we do with kinship training. But there's, you know, training, I think, that needs to happen all along. And you know, we're working towards having it be a streamlined, stress-free approval process. We do have a support group in Lynchburg for parents, kinship resource parents, to meet once a month. And you know, even trying to celebrate, like we do a National Adoption Day, we should have a National Kinship Day, hosting appreciation events, networking events, and just sharing resources, trying to stay connected on Facebook, and that families should have opportunities to also assess the agency so that the agency knows places where we could get better and improve. You can go to the next slide, April. And I want to talk about a few case studies that we have here in Lynchburg, successful kinship placements. And I believe we do have some of the families who are on tonight's training. So I am not able to see. I do believe that Teresa and Phil Hibbert are on tonight's training. And Kendall, can you verify that?
They are.
Okay, and there should also be Tina Bates Jones.
I don't remember seeing her. pop in, but Tina? No, I don't remember Tina.
All right. I know Teresa and Phil are here. Teresa and Phil, is there anything that you could add?
Oh, sorry about that. We got a little bit of a full house now. We have another foster child that we got today. Kin fostering it's challenging, especially when it's your daughter, and you have her child, and but you can see the difference as you work with them and you teach them the right ways. We were asked a question. Well, my wife was asked a question yesterday. Let's tell what you were asking. Well, was it yesterday while she was taken away?
Yeah, she was asking me why did she get taken away from her mother, and all for the first time within, I think we've had her like almost a year now, and all of a sudden out of the blue she wanted to know. So I pretty much had to tell her the reason why and all, and she seemed to be okay with it and all. But when you in kinship, it takes a lot of time and patience with kids. You've got to have the time and the patience. That's the main key of the whole situation, because they have their ups and downs, and you've really got to have a lot of patience with them and deal with a lot of the things they're going through and being there for them and stuff. So.
And I could add, Teresa and Phil, they're kinship foster parents, and they've recently become foster parents, so they're also fostering. So some of our kinship parents have been through foster parent training because they feel, motivated now after being foster parents for their relative children, that foster parenting is just very interesting. They're very interested in that. So we're getting foster parents that way. I know that also Michelle is on tonight's training. And Michelle, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your experience.
Hey, hello. Yeah, I can talk a little bit. I'm in kinship, and it's for my brother's daughter, and it was hard in the beginning because her mother was she was upset. At first she wanted me to get her, but then she was upset because I was abiding by the rules of having her. So I guess she consented to it at first because she thought that I would still allow her to do what she wanted to do and come and get her and everything. And I had to, set those boundaries and let her know that the reason why we're even experiencing what we're experiencing is because it was some things that she wasn't doing correctly. So I think I had to set a boundary line once I became her kinship foster parent. So that was hard, but once my brother seen how I was working with her and how she was how she knows her ABCs a little, not a lot, but she can count to 10 and she's only one. He was saying that he wasn't upset anymore at the fact that I had her, that he seen that I was taking care of her and teaching her things that she didn't know before, and that she needed someone to actually care for her. So I guess it can go two ways, because now I have a parent that's okay with me having her and actually glad that I have her and teaching her, and then I have a parent that's mad at me because I'm abiding by the rules. So we have to have visitation at DSS, but it's a wonderful experience. I'm not against her parents. I want them to get their self together. If they do get their self together, I'm pro them having her and me being an active aunt, because I always have been. But that's pretty much my story. I have my niece, and I'm loving every minute of it.
So I have a question for the Hibbards and Michelle. What were some of your fears when this first happened? I hear a lot of people say I was scared DSS would judge me and they would never look at me. Does that resonate as true? Or talk to us a little bit about those fears that you as a relative have coming into this?
I fear
Yeah.
my brother
We weren't.
preventing me having his daughter. You know, I feared our relationship, going really downhill because I was being something that he couldn't be for his child. Um, so I was really just fearing my family being dysfunctional after bringing her into my home the way I had to bring her into my home.
We weren't really worried about DSS judging us. Our biggest thing was, you know, we wanted to get Kendall out of foster care because she was in just regular foster care, and her mother didn't want us to have her. And we did the kinship training and all that, and so we could get her with us. When we first got her, she was behind in school. She was getting kicked out of school in first grade and kindergarten for the simple fact of she wasn't getting any help at work, so she was getting frustrated and stuff like that. Um, we were. It was. I guess we could say that we were a little hesitant on what people in the family would think and stuff like that, but we wouldn't trade it for anything. I mean, she's come a long way. She's got all A's in school. She's moving on to second grade, and she's a lot more mature. She's happy, and yeah, she's doing really good.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing that. It looks like Tina might have jumped on. Are you here, Tina?
I just texted her. Usually if she won't text back if she's on Zoom. So I don't know if.
It says she joined.
Okay. Tina?
Yeah.
Tina, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you, do you want to speak about your experience? You were Alexa?
Yes, I don't mind speaking, but I like the kinship portion of it because I was a foster care provider inside of California also. And that was where I had adopted my daughter. And the two experiences in which I've had, especially the kinship one, was I think that it gives the child a sense of belonging, more so when you place them in a place in which they really don't know somebody. Um, and it is like with her that she may not have seen us, but we in Iran, but we had like pictures to be able to show her or to tell her stories about people that she might have been about and things like that. And it also helps
Tina, your connection's breaking up. I don't know if you can hear us, but we can't hear you that well.
Okay. Okay, let me see if I can slip over. Let's
Okay.
go out the back side. I'm gonna try to go outside and see if I can get a better connection. Okay. Oh, you know
Okay.
what? And let me put it over Wi-Fi. Give me just a second to turn
Okay.
my Wi-Fi on. All right.
While we're giving her a chance to do that, I don't know if Michelle or the Hibbards, if you want to talk a little bit about what was she back? I was going to say maybe the extra access that, or do is there any extra access or to other family, additional extended family that the children have since they're with you, maintaining other connections?
My niece, she has an older brother and an older sister. Her sister is in her father's custody, and she has actually came over and stayed 3 nights with Juliet at my residence. Her brother, she has not seen, but I have sent him pictures of her, and he does call my phone and talk to her and ask me how she doing and so forth. So I still have her connected to her siblings and her mother. We're supposed to have visitation every Monday at social services. And if she calls me in between that time and wants to see her, I do allow her to come over and have supervised visitation with Juliet as well. My brother, he still, he comes around, he has supervised visitation with her as well over here in my residence. Everybody else on her mother's side, I have not heard from. Julia, have not seen. But on her father's side, I am the only one, me and my children and my mother. See, me and her father have the same father. So we have different mothers. So my family is supportive of Juliet, but her father's mother's family is not. I haven't seen them either.
And I go with my dad's mom.
Well, Kendall sees her dad now. She didn't see him very often when she was
Where did
with
she
mother.
go?
Or who?
Did
She's
she
out
go?
there.
Huh?
She's out. She's in a room. And she gets to see a brother that is he is with the dad and his mother along with his sister. So she gets to see them now, and she didn't really get to see him very much before that. And she's spending more time with our family, which is my wife's family and stuff like that. So we've always tried to keep the family, close to her, because we've had her since she was a baby, pretty much. We've had her, pretty much all summer, just about every weekend, and so we try to keep her in the loop. We'll let her dad come over and have supervised visits, and her mother can come. We let her mother come over and supervise visits and stuff like that. So we don't try to keep any of her family or extended family away. She really, I don't think she's seen her grandma on her dad's side and stuff like that. So, hold on.
I just want to add that that's a benefit, definitely, that we see with kinship placements. The visitation a lot of times can occur in the home rather than here at DSS, so it's a more natural setting. And also, the children, when the birth, if the birth parents can be appropriate, the children do not lose their connection with their birth parents. I have a family that I work with right now where the child was not able to return home to the birth parents, but this child has a regular connection with his birth father and sees him on Sundays at church. So it's just a much more natural, less traumatic situation for a child when they're in kinship placements.
And also, I wanted to add to that is that, like I was saying, that that I adopted my daughter out of foster care back over 20 years ago. And with her, she's at a point in which, because she's had no contact with her biological family, now she's trying to do the DNA testings and all of that kind of thing, because she's trying to find those people. She has a sense of no belonging. I have a brother that was adopted. I am trying to help him trying to find his family. My mother, we ended up doing ancestry, and we was good enough, even though she's 78 years old, to be able to find the majority of her brothers and sisters. And we have had
we have had the ability to go to Massachusetts and to visit. Alexa, on the other hand, she's had the joys of having just within my household. She had me, um, um, her father, and now her aunt is here. Plus, she's with me, and it's also easier for the kids because when I enroll them in school and when she's talking, she doesn't have to say this is my foster parent. She can easily say this is my aunt, and it kind of takes that stigma off of her also, where the children aren't looking and going, oh, so you were in foster care. I mean, you can actually just pretty much just leave that out, and nobody really knows or have the stigma of them being in foster care. And it is more so of I am just with a family member, which is more acceptable, and which a lot of people are with family members.
Tina, I think you hit on something that's so important. You were talking about your daughter that you adopted, but one of the things we hear from adult adoptees is how important it is that they have these answers and a connection to their history. And there's no better way to give them that than by maintaining that family connection. And so if a child is adopted, they can't return them. They are adopted by kinship placement. They have the answers to their birth family questions. They know their family history, and it's so critical. And so I would urge a lot of you, if you're ever read about the experiences of adult adoptees, listen to their story, and staying with siblings and all those things. Those are knowing their family story and where they came from, and just information about birth families. It's so important, and that's something that kinship really is a solution for in a lot of ways.
Kinship also, if we can't find, if we don't have a family member that we can place the child with, for whatever reason, I'll just give you an example. We had a great grandmother that could not foster her granddaughter, but she was able to provide respite care, transportation, and she couldn't be a placement for her, but there were so many other things that she could help with, and she was an asset to us and to her granddaughter. So that's just something to keep the door open on too. Maybe a relative can't be a placement, but they can serve in other roles, and that still allows the child to be connected.
Michelle, were you going to say something?
I was muted. I was gonna say, add on to my story. I guess it feels kind of different for Juliet too, because it really wasn't a change really for her when I got her. When they accepted me to become her foster parent, it really wasn't a change because I had already had things to accommodate her because I was a very active auntie. I had her since she was 6 weeks old. Her mama would bring her to me and leave her for a little while, then come back and get her. So she was used to me and my kids anyway, and she had that attachment. So I think that was a plus for me when I went to get her, because we had already had a bond, and she didn't have to get used to me or get used to the fact that she wasn't going to see her mommy, because she was already used to being in my home with me and my children anyway.
Absolutely.
And she calls me Monty. So she calls me, as she was calling me mom at first, and I was like, no, auntie. Then she still say mom, from time to time, because she's one. So we had came up with this one day. She had collided the two, and it was like Monty. And I was like, Monty, I like that. So every time when we talk, I tell her, call me Monty, so that her mom don't get offended, and she knows that I'm auntie, but I'm doing mommy duty. So Monty is fine. So her mom didn't get offended, thank God. And her daddy loves the name. Everybody loves the name. So we was like, thank God, ain't nobody get offended. I was not trying to offend nobody. I just want to take care of her until they can either do it, or, if I have to continue to do it, I'm willing and able.
Yeah. And I see Christy is asking. Christy was asking if you all went through the more recent kinship training, and I believe you all have, right? I know the Hibbards have. I know Tina went through it. And Michelle, did you go through the recent kinship training, or are you about to start?
Yeah, I went through the recent one.
Yeah. Do any of you want to talk about your experiences and being in a group with other people in the same situation or a similar situation? And then have any of you participated in the support group?
I haven't participated in the group because I am so far away. Because I am about from so So I haven't gotten to any of them. But I think that I enjoyed it because I had gotten all the training on how to deal with foster kids that's not a part of my family. But by having that training where they're giving me some insight, and some of the people that have already had already had children placed within their house, things in which they said, even though in the back of my mind I was going, that's not going to be me because my family's going to be different. It turned out my family was just the exact same. And it prepared me for the grandfather turning around to his grandchild, and that I am still the auntie type of thing. And just trying to separate those kind of things. And so I thought that the training was very helpful because it prepared me for things that I may not have otherwise been able to be prepared for, and the people telling their stories as we went around.
Well, it was really it was funny to me because Susan was actually telling, which is the director, she was actually telling her story, and believe it or not, I felt like she was me. She was talking and she was saying that she did the kinship for her brother's children as well. And just listening to some of her experiences with him throughout the time that she had her niece and nephew, I was like, oh my God, I feel like she's telling my story. So it gave me a sense of feeling like I'm not alone. Or when my brother have his spaz outs and I'm around the DSS, it makes me feel like I'm not crazy. Because I was like, just to see acting like that, I hope they don't think that I'm crazy too, because I'm his sister. And she just reassured me that, don't feel that way. And it was kind of like a support thing for me. I needed that. I needed to talk to someone else that either was experiencing or had experienced what I'm experiencing, if that makes sense. And I needed that training, and it was very knowledgeable, and for my own kids as well, as to how to deal with different things, and how to address different things with the child that's coming into my home, and I was like, that's a good idea for my own children, so it was just very knowledgeable, and it let me know that I was not alone when I felt like I was.
And just to let you all know that Lynchburg has a kinship trainer, Susan Taylor. She is a kinship provider, so she brings a lot of experience and knowledge to her trainings. If you're ever interested in a training, you can just you can let me know, because Susan always welcomes people into the trainings who just want to learn about kinship. So you can just let me know, and I can make sure you get the next registration link. I wanted to emphasize, we've definitely seen it firsthand, the behavioral changes in children. We can have kids that are on the verge of disruption with seasoned foster parents, and we move them with kinship providers, and they just do a complete 360. I mean, they improve in all areas. We had another set of grandparents. They're not on this training tonight, but their grandchildren, they had pretty significant trauma and significant behaviors, and they were disrupting placements and having issues in daycare. And we moved them to the grandparents, and it was rough at first because they had to learn about trauma, and they had to learn a new way to parent children who had trauma. And those kids, that was the first time that those two children had become stable and weren't bouncing homes. And they are at a point now where they're going through the adoption process with their grandparents. But their mental health, their behaviors, their schooling, everything improved. And best of all, they stayed put. They didn't bounce homes.
Something I want to just touch on too is that the kinship training is not just for Lynchburg. It is open to Amherst, Appomattox, Bedford, Campbell, Lynchburg, Nelson. We all partner together through a Kinship Navigator grant. And so that training runs all year. You know, there might be a few weeks off, but it's running pretty regularly. And so if you are a CASA for any of those localities or even neighboring localities, we will let anybody in. We let anybody in. We let other localities send folks all the time. So if you're on a case as an advocate, and you know of a relative, ask DSS, hey, why isn't this person in kinship training? The next one starts next month. Or, hey, why haven't they been to kinship training yet? That's another way you can advocate, because that training runs very regularly and it's virtual. So even if you have a relative that lives in Richmond, they could log into our training and they could get that class. And so there are lots of ways that we're trying to be flexible and make this available. Kendall, you asked earlier about where did I see it, about the difference between kinship placement and relative that petitions for custody. And the way we've been using kinship care kind of as a kinship, like a foster parent. And so there are certainly lots of unofficial kinship arrangements, kids living with grandparents, aunt, uncle, that never go through the court, never touch DSS. So there's probably thousands, if not millions, of those placements just organically in our country. But we're specifically referencing kinship foster care placements today. And the difference between relatives that petition for custody is that, so really we should not be giving legal advice. So we shouldn't be telling people, go petition for custody. It is an option, and we certainly let people know options. But a person does not have to go petition for custody to be considered as a relative placement. Every DSS agency should be immediately saying, okay, we've got a relative that's interested, come through. Let's look at you as a foster parent. We should not be telling people, go petition for custody, then we'll talk to you, or after your home study by the court, we'll talk to you. No, we should be looking at them as a kinship foster parent arrangement immediately. The moment we know they're interested, the moment we find them, and they shouldn't necessarily have to go through that process. They shouldn't have to file for custody to be thrown into the game. We are obligated to work with them whether they file for custody or not, and we should, because that's what's right for kids and for families and for kinship. Making them jump through all those additional hoops is not necessary. And so that's something I frequently see as, oh, well, you haven't filed for custody yet, it doesn't matter. And there's lots of other things. We could probably talk about this for weeks between Susan and I and the rest of us, probably, because it's fascinating and interesting and so important. But when someone petition relatives for custody, they're going in saying, I want to take custody of this child. They might not necessarily want custody right away. They might want to give the parents an opportunity to get their child back, or to get services to strengthen that family. A lot of our kinship, they support reunification, but they also are available for potentially maybe adoption if the child can't go home. And so it is great to have all of those options. So what I really want you guys to take away is, the moment we know of kinship, we should all be jumping in to see, how can we support them? How can we make this happen? Kinship is messy because they have those dynamics that Michelle and everyone were talking about, where you have, sister-in-law's mad at me because she thinks I stole her child, and I'm not allowed to even go to Thanksgiving dinner with my own family now. And so really this program and this training is to support them and to give, so they know that they're in a room full of other people going through the same situation or similar situations. So it's just, there are lots of options available. The training is available. And I just want to make sure you all know that. And as you're advocating and writing your reports, you're saying, like, well, kinship training, we've had 3 since this child's been in care, and since we've known of this relative, why aren't they in the class yet? Things like that. Help hold us accountable and responsible. We all need that. It's not a perfect system. I think we all want to do right by children. This is taking a culture change and a shift, really. We have to change our mindset around kinship. We have to think kin first. That is what is best. And sometimes it's not doable. Sometimes there's a relative who can't do it full time. Well, can they go visit on the weekend? Can they come to the birthday party? Can they come over for Sunday night dinner? What can they do? How can they be involved in this child's life? Sometimes a grandparent wants to be a grandparent, and that is perfectly fine. But how can we make them grandparent then? How can they still be involved? So, sorry, rant over.
I just want to mention too, the support group is virtual. Pre-pandemic, it was in person, but Susan Taylor also does a support group. She's going to leave virtual options for support group and also for training, so that folks that are an hour away or more can just participate virtually. So we will go back to some face-to-face, but she's also going to maintain virtual trainings and support group. Does anybody have any questions?
I'd like to add to the classes and stuff. I enjoyed it because it was like a refresher. You know, there's things that you learn and you may not realize that you learned it, but when you go back in, you get a refresher class and you're like, oh, okay. You know, it's sometimes you miss a little bit of like how to treat the child, or you know, the trauma that they have and different kinds of trauma. And you know, it definitely, I personally think that it helps to go back and take the class again and do that.
And Susan always offers that also to folks who have been through the kinship training, that they can reach out to Susan at any time. They can, you know, just choose to participate in one class that had information that they were really interested in. So they're always welcome to come back to training, and they can choose what training they want to do. And they continue to have access to foster parent college, because that's another part of the training. And I see that Christy was asking if the judges are given pushback with the relative placements. And I mean, my experience has been, I think that they can do a better job, because I've, you know, definitely been in the courtroom where there are relatives there, and, you know, nobody is really acknowledging them or engaging them. So I do think the judges could do a better job with being more engaging with relatives. And, you know, it's, as I said earlier, I think as a whole, the community needs more education about kinship care. And that's when I think we'll start to see a lot more change, when, you know, we're able to get out and educate the community about the benefits of kinship care, and the willingness of the agency to work with families, so families are more likely to engage with us and not be afraid of DSS.
I see lots of really good questions. And just so you know too, the court does not have to order a home study on relatives for us to pursue that. So that's something DSS at any time gets to choose where that child is placed. It, you know, a judge does not get to tell us, or does not have to tell us, okay, yes, you can place the relative. We get to do that at any time. We cannot be ordered where to place a child. The only time is if a judge orders custody to someone, if he transfers custody. So if we have a relative, the moment we identify them and find out they're appropriate, we can place. And also, a lot of times you'll see a judge order a home study, and you might hear someone say, well, we need to wait till the home study comes back. No, you don't. You should already be making that assessment and looking into that relative for kinship, because the end of that process will yield a home study anyway. As any kinship foster parent or regular traditional foster parent, they all have a home study at the end. So I mean, we do not have to wait, as long as, once we have the, you know, the basic things, you know, initial assessment, we feel like they're safe, they've got all the background checks, we've seen the home, we can place that child.
And to add to that, if you don't mind, just with my situation, I found out that they were gonna remove my niece, and once I did, the very next day, I went and I filed for emergency custody, and then the very next day after that, I went to social services and I signed up for kinship training. And I mean, I was moving fast. I was trying to hit every angle to make sure that she remained really in my care, because she was with me anyway, but she was in foster care for 13 days before she was placed back in my custody. And that was only because, like you said, they had to do the screening to make sure that my background was okay and that I didn't have anything on my record. But it moved pretty fast. You know, 13 days is a long time. I stressed, I barely slept, but it was fast, you know, considering what was taking place.
And I would be willing to bet that some of the others, Tina and probably the Hibbards, the people who have gone through further in the past, you probably waited a lot longer than 30 days. So I think we're trying to get better. We're trying to get faster. We're not perfect. No one is, but I think we're slowly getting there. And I know that Kinship we talked to from years ago would say it took a whole lot longer than 13 days, probably months. So,
but like I said, I was on it though. I like, you have to be on it and you have to turn in with what you're supposed to turn in order for it to go fast. So it's not just y'all job, it's our job too. If we want it done fast, we have to do what we have to do, and y'all have to do what y'all have to do, and everybody have to work together as a team so that we can get it done. So I thank God for the teammates that I had working with me to get her back home with me.
And the typical process is, if we have contact information, we reach out to the relative. We do a home visit. We do get those crucial pieces of paperwork, a DMV check, fingerprint, central registry check, and they have to do a sworn statement. And then, there's a lot more paperwork, but we try to get those 4 crucial pieces, and then we work through the other pieces of paperwork, because the paperwork can be overwhelming. But it is helpful, when families do have some help and guidance, going through the paperwork with them. But it can be a quick process. And like Michelle said, it was quick for Michelle because Michelle was on it. Michelle went and got her fingerprints right away. Teresa and Phil, the same thing. Tina, the same thing. They were on it. I mean, they were just rolling through the checks and the paperwork. And, so that's helpful too, to just, not to stall with getting the paperwork completed. Yeah, Christy, you mentioned on the PowerPoint earlier where it said that the court document should have a checkbox on there. That is, that's another wish list thing. I don't know if there would be in a hurry. They do have a box that we have to check off to make sure that a child's not, it's the ICWA.
I'm gonna take it off so you don't get me in the middle.
What was that, Tina?
I apologize. I was trying to tell my niece to get in the middle of the trampoline because she was trying to and I have forgot to mute it, but I was going to say that hopefully by getting the kinship training out there to the public and to get people more knowledgeable that it is available and for the things to be able to do, because as in my case, I didn't even know that my niece was in foster care. It took me a long time to figure that out. And sometimes the parents don't want to give that information out of either shame or out of the belief that they may be able to keep the kid, and then the child is placed in foster care until a relative does step up. And then after that, the process goes a lot faster. But if the information was out there about kinship foster care, because I know that since I've had it and I have mentioned to people about kinship foster care, people are looking at me like they don't know what I am talking about. And I think that there needs to be something like maybe a public service broadcast message or something like that that gets the message out to the family members that this thing exists, so that they're more aware that if something does happen, like Michelle said, they can step in early enough. But I had no idea what was going on, and I am more than sure that there's a lot of other people that probably knows that, and then that is unaware of it too. And then foster care can't find everybody because they're trying to find them, but nobody knows that they are being looked for. If you understand what
Tina, do you mind sharing your experience, how you came to find out Alexa was in foster care?
Yes. Actually, what ended up happening was that my niece was talking to her father, and when she was talking to her father, which happens to be my brother, she finally mentioned that the child was in foster care. But that was only at the point in which she had found out that the child was about to be moved into a group home. So there had been years in between the time that she was placed into foster care and the time in which I found out about it. And then my brother ended up telling me about it. Once I found out about it, that's when I started making the steps in order to try to get, hold on one second. Trying to get her placed inside of the house, but at that time frame, DSS had already had other people that was trying to also grab her, not realizing who's the family and who's not the family, and it just caused this whirlwind type of a thing. So it was truly by accident that I found out, because had I found out earlier, I would have gotten her much earlier. And I was on Facebook with my niece, talking to her and everything else too. And I just did not know that my great niece was in foster care.
Well, if I could add to, I didn't know that my niece was going to be taken away either. I was at work, and I received a phone call stating that the police department and DSS was at my niece's mother's house beating on the door to remove the kids. That's how I found out. And the same day, they came to my home, where I have a 14-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. And like I said, I was at work and my daughter was at home with her brother. And I got a call saying that the police was at the door and they were knocking with social services. So I was really bum rushed with it. I didn't know
That's
either.
for a while. And I'm like, oh, I better get my hours in. It's for CASA for my kids.
Yeah, like I
Mm-hmm.
said, I was bum rushed with it. I didn't know either. And they didn't she was running. She actually didn't, once she found out that they were coming to remove the baby, she was running. She went on the run with it. So I had to kind of convince her to give her over, if that makes sense. I had to convince her to come to my house and meet with the lady to give her Juliet. And that was one of the most hardest things I ever had to experience in my life. And I hope I never have to go through it again. But I was bum rushed with it as well. And once it was brought to my attention, I acted pissed. But she was not in their custody at the time that I was acting. When I was going down there filing petition for emergency custody and so on and so forth, they hadn't got her in their custody yet. Her mother was still running with her. So I guess that's why mine went a little fast too, because once they had finally got her in their custody is when I did the fingerprints and everything. So I think that was maybe like 6 days, maybe 5 days after I filed for custody of her. So I guess that's why mine went fast too, because I acted as soon as I found out, and her mama hadn't turned it in, but I knew that I could convince her, to hand her over without running. So.
And I see a couple comments. Denise wrote that parents can be in denial about what's happening. And Christy had also noted that parents can do an exceptional job keeping it hidden that their children are in foster care. And I think that that's why it's crucial that the search is at the very start of the process, and it continues all along the foster care timeline. Even if there is a goal of adoption approved, we have to keep on looking, because just in Tina's experience, she had no idea. And I think some of that was, I believe Alexa was allowed to be on Facebook at a certain point in time. She hadn't been allowed on Facebook for quite some time, and we had also decided that she needed to learn to navigate that platform safely, so we allowed her to have access, which she basically is the one that connected to her family members. And Alexa had been in foster care for quite some time, so but if we keep looking
at the time frame in which everybody was talking to her, but it was never ever mentioned at the time frame. And we were clueless because there is a distance in which Alexa and her mom had moved from Virginia in 2005, and she had been in Lynchburg since that time frame, which means that she had not been around her father's side of the family or her mother's side of the family, and which is in the Newport News, Richmond area, and I am down in Charles City. So there's a big difference. There's a big distance between that, and not knowing what's going on in the home makes it very hard to be able to figure out or to know that you need to step up. And I know in talking to like other people and stuff like that, and for the kids, if that message is put out, especially with the young kids and stuff that may be going into foster care, that they may know of an aunt or an uncle or something like that, that they may be able to tell foster care that they have an aunt or or an uncle somewhere that is not close by.
Yeah, that's definitely I do have some teens that I work with, and there's sometimes a hesitancy to have the kids have access to the social media, but there's a way to do that safely. And I definitely have teenagers that I work with that we allow monitored access to Facebook, and they do engage cousins and step siblings and half siblings, and it's a good way to find family. And I have definitely pursued some family placement options via connection that a teenager has made on Facebook. So I know people have a tendency to not want the teens to be on Facebook, but it can be done safely, and it can be used as a tool for that child to connect with family, and we can learn a lot from that.
And Christy made a comment too and that's part of the reason why we must reserve judgment when we find family members, even after the child has been in care for a long time. We have to listen more and find out the why, and that is critical. You have to listen to the why, listen to them, get to know them, take time to talk to them, learn what's going on in that family. Sometimes they didn't know, sometimes they weren't ready, sometimes they didn't realize how significant it was. And so a lot of times, we have to talk and talk and talk again and have some hard conversations. But absolutely listen to Kinship, give them a voice, and get to know them. Those are just critical pieces of this.
April or Susan, would one of y'all also be willing to mention, like sometimes in these cases that we've been talking about where it's near the very end of the case, where maybe a family member has been located, the child has been in care for a while, sometimes to, people looking on, it looks like the case has been going towards adoption. Sometimes it can cause some really strong feelings for other people outside of the family. Maybe the foster family is going through loss, maybe the CASA or the social worker or the GAL, like really grappling to get their minds around this change in the case. Can you talk a little bit, especially when like it's a very young child and they've bonded with their foster family, it maybe has been the home that they've lived in for, a good part of their life. How do we still, why is it still a principle that kinship is the first best? Why is that still the best option, even if the child has bonded to their foster family?
Yeah. I think what
There's
you're
always,
going to, go ahead,
go
Susan.
ahead, April. No, go ahead, April.
What you're going to find is that, you know, if you specifically talking about young children, that's great if they've bonded. We want kids to have a happy, healthy attachment because that teaches us that they can go on to attach and love others. I think a lot of it too is you're not looking at this infant or this toddler at this point in time. You're looking at the rest of their life. And a lot of times, you know, what we hear a lot of adult adoptees say is, I wish I knew more. I wish I'd had a connection with my birth family. Like, I have so many questions. And so we have to think about the entire picture of that child's life. And if they're going to, you know, kind of some of the stuff we've talked about, the benefits, an ongoing connection to that family, they'll know their family story. So there's so many benefits to kinship and that long-term kind of life plan. Maybe their parent will get it together in 10 years, and maybe they will have some kind of healthy relationship with their parent, or they will have a connection to other siblings or relatives or cousins. But also, there are ways to make that transition happen. Is it hard? Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, we should give foster parents time to grieve. We should. Part of that is also the reason why we hit the ground running from the beginning to find kinship, because the faster we identify them, the longer they have to be in a home with traditional foster parents who aren't relatives, who are getting attached every single day. We owe it to children that when we have that relative, to move them as quickly as possible so that that doesn't happen. And when it does, you know, if a relative does come out later in the picture, they should be visiting frequently. They should be visiting, that those visits should be extended over a long period of time. The more that they get to visit, the more access they have to that child, the more comfortable that child will get. And then that child, we can also put services in place to help that attachment or help that bonding or get recommendations along those things. But we should be working with service providers or whatnot to make that happen versus keeping them apart, keeping them away. The longer we do it, it only hurts the child. The child loses big time. Hope that helped.
You know, and I'll just, one final thing to add is that kinship care can be messy. It can be definitely much different than having a child placed in a foster parent home. Just the boundaries, families learning the boundaries, learning that they're acting in the role of a foster parent and not, so much as just a grandparent. They're a grandparent or aunt, uncle / foster parent, so they do have to abide by foster parent guidelines and rules. But it definitely can be more complicated, but it is so worth it if you can stick with it and you can put the services in place, and the family is surrounded by a team of people who are supporting them. I have definitely seen it be messy, and you just work through it and you stick at it, and it gets good, and it works. And I'm not going to say that we don't have kinship placements that don't work, but there are more placements that do work. I have seen that myself, that there are more success stories when we place children with kin.
And I think you just hit a good point there, too, Susan. People are going to mess up. That doesn't mean we run and yank the child out of that home immediately. We talk to them. We figure it out. We see what's going on. We provide services. People are going to mess up. We owe it to that child and that family to have a conversation about it and do work around that.
Plus, on top of that, you have to also realize that the traditional foster care messed up also. So because of that, give the kinship people that same chance to mess up and grow. So no matter whether it's a traditional or the kinship, both of them will mess up. And there are horror stories on the traditional foster care side. So I don't see why the kinship side does not get the same type of put like the um, traditional side does.
Okay, so I put in the chat a short, I want to thank everybody for attending tonight's training. I'm not sure if there's any more questions, but before we leave, I wanted to thank you guys for attending tonight's training, and thank you, April, and thank you, Susan, for lending your time to CASA as we try to equip our advocates to be the very best that they can in advocating what's in the best interest of the children. And I have put a link in for a short survey. I think it's like 5 questions. And CASA would appreciate if you guys would go ahead and quickly fill those out. Just dot, 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 dot. I mean, it's not, very challenging or anything like that. It just helps us to provide different trainings and know what we may need areas to strengthen and that sort of thing. So I would appreciate if you would go ahead and fill those out for us. And if nobody else has any questions, let me check over my list to make sure I don't. I think we covered everything that I wanted to cover. And I think I've got, we did take attendance, so everybody should very shortly be receiving their little certification for this training. And are there any more questions?
I just noticed that Christy did ask a question about the last page that's on my slide, and I don't know if anybody has noticed this. When you're coming over the John Lynch Bridge, there's a little sign that says it's something like Lynchburg is a tree city or something. Because they have so many trees, and so I just thought that it would be nice if one day we could have a sign that said that Lynchburg was a Kin First city. So it's kind of silly.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, that's what that was. Last slide.
Yes. Yes. And as we were doing the looking at the slides, there was a site www.accruent.com government, something like that. I'm not sure what that was all about, but I will log on to that. Is that something that we could get some information from there from?
Yeah, that is something that we use in the agency.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's not something that's a government site to do searches. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We use the PowerPoint in all different forums, so some of the stuff I just didn't take off.
Oh, okay. Let's see, who was that? Abelson asked about information for the Kinship trainers. Yeah, how could we find out about when these are offered so we can circulate to our families and to our CASAs? And I also wanted to attend them as well.
So
how can we find out when they're being offered?
What I can do is I can talk to Susan Taylor. She's the trainer. She does send me the flyers in advance with the scheduled times and dates. I can either forward them on to you or have her add you all to her list. I do know as far as CASA participating in some of her training, she would probably ask that it's like limited to maybe 1 or 2 CASAs at a time, just because it is virtual and she does try to keep it intimate. So I will definitely reach out to Susan Taylor and see how she wants to work that. But I know that she would definitely welcome you all into training.
Okay, that sounds good. So either way works for us. If we're added to the list, or our email address is circulated to her, that would be fine.
Okay.
So if that's it, I'm not going to hold anybody any longer. I'm going to let you get to your families. And for those that are Kinship fosters, go ahead and get to your little kiddos. It's getting dark outside, and I'm sure a lot of them are used to their schedules, and we're not going to keep them any longer. Thank you for participating. We're so glad that it's going well for you. I know there are challenges that you have to get through, but in the end, it's what's in the best interest of the children. And we do commend and thank you for being their Kinship placement. So with that, I'm going to say good night, and everybody be safe if you got to drive. Bye-bye.
Good night. Good night. Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. Thank you.